Welcome back to Books and Bytes. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into The Power of Discipline by Daniel Walter. It's a book all about self-discipline, kind of breaking down why it matters so much, what it actually is, and how we can all get better at it. I don't know about you, but I'm always looking for ways to bridge that gap between wanting to achieve something and actually making it happen.
Well, one of the things this book does that I think is so interesting is that it really challenges that idea that we hear all the time, that talent is the key to success. It argues that discipline is actually a far stronger predictor of achievement.
That's interesting. It really makes you think about all the times we've seen those people who maybe aren't the most naturally gifted, but they just have this incredible work ethic and dedication. And they end up surpassing those with raw talent.
Right. I mean, think about elite athletes. They don't just rely on natural ability, right? They put in countless hours of training, push themselves beyond their comfort zones, stick to these strict routines. I mean, that's discipline in action.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like that saying, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard.
Exactly. And the book goes even deeper, exploring the science behind self-control. It explains that our willpower actually operates like a muscle, a limited but renewable resource. So just like a muscle gets tired after a workout, our willpower can be depleted too.
Oh, that makes sense. I've definitely felt that. Like after a long day of making decisions and trying to stay focused, it's like my brain just runs out of steam.
Exactly. But the good news is that just like with physical exercise, the more we use our willpower, the stronger it gets. With consistent practice, we can actually increase our capacity for self-control.
So it's like we're training for a mental marathon.
Exactly. It's about building that mental stamina over time.
That's encouraging. But I think for some people, hearing all this might feel a little daunting, Like, where do you even begin? What are some practical ways that people can start flexing that self-control muscle without feeling overwhelmed?
That's a great question, and I think the key is to start small. Don't try to overhaul your entire life overnight. Focus on building one positive habit at a time. Maybe it's something like waking up earlier, cutting back on sugar, whatever resonates with you. And instead of relying solely on willpower, try to create an environment that supports that goal.
Oh, I like that. It's like setting yourself up for success rather than just relying on brute force willpower, which we know can be kind of unreliable.
Exactly. So, for example, if you want to wake up earlier, you could try putting your alarm clock across the room so you actually have to get out of bed to turn it off. Little changes like that can make a big difference.
That's a great tip. I'm going to try that. It's funny how we often make things harder on ourselves than they need to be.
Right. It's like we're fighting against our own nature sometimes. But when we understand how our brains work and use that to our advantage, we can set ourselves up for success. The book actually talks a lot about the importance of understanding something called the habit loop.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. Can you explain it for those who maybe haven't?
Sure. So the habit loop is basically a three-part process. It starts with a cue, which is basically a trigger that sets off a particular behavior. Then comes the routine, which is the behavior itself. And finally, there's the reward, which is the feeling or outcome we get from that behavior.
So like if someone is trying to break a bad habit, like let's say mindlessly scrolling on their phone every time they feel stressed, the cue would be that feeling of stress. The routine would be picking up the phone and scrolling. And the reward would be that temporary feeling of distraction or escape.
Exactly. And so to build better habits, we need to become more aware of those cues and rewards that are driving those unwanted behaviors. And then we can start to replace those unproductive routines with more positive ones.
So it's kind of like hacking our own brains in a way. We can understand these underlying mechanics, and then we can use that knowledge to create the changes we want to see.
Exactly. Like, let's say you want to start reading more. Instead of relying on willpower to resist watching TV every evening, maybe try leaving a book on your couch with a bookmark in it. That visual cue can make it more likely that you'll pick up the book instead of the remote.
I love that. It's all about setting up those little nudges for ourselves, those gentle reminders that can steer us in the right direction.
Exactly. And if you pair that with a reward, like enjoying a cup of tea while you read, even better.
That's a great tip. I'm going to start doing that. Now, there's another important concept the book talks about that I want to touch on, and that's delayed gratification. It's that whole idea of resisting those immediate temptations in favor of bigger long-term rewards.
Right. And the book actually highlights a very famous experiment called the marshmallow experiment, where they basically tested this idea with kids and marshmallows.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. The kids who could resist eating one marshmallow right away were rewarded with two later on.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that the kids who were able to delay gratification ended up having better outcomes later in life in all sorts of areas. They tended to do better academically, have stronger relationships, even make healthier choices.
Wow. So it really does pay off in the long run.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a skill that takes practice.
Absolutely. And the book dives into strategies for training our brains to prioritize those long-term goals, even when faced with those enticing short-term temptations.
It's like we have to become the CEO of our own lives, making those executive decisions that our future selves will thank us for, even if it means a little bit of sacrifice in the present moment. But I'm curious, how do we actually make those choices consistently, especially in a world that's filled with so many distractions?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Our modern world is a minefield of distractions. Our phones, social media, the constant influx of information, it's easy to get overwhelmed and lose sight of what's truly important.
I know I'm definitely guilty of that. Sometimes I catch myself just mindlessly scrolling and clicking without even realizing what I'm doing. It's like we're on autopilot, reacting to every notification and alert. How do we break free from that?
Well, the book offers a number of strategies, but one that really stood out to me is this concept of digital minimalism. It's about becoming more intentional with our digital consumption, creating space for what truly matters.
So it's not about completely disconnecting from technology.
Yeah.
It's probably unrealistic for most people these days, but it's more about using it consciously and purposefully.
Exactly. It's about taking back control of our time and attention and making those conscious choices about how we want to spend our energy.
That makes a lot of sense. Instead of mindlessly scrolling through social media, maybe we could use that time to pursue a hobby, connect with loved ones, or just enjoy some quiet time for reflection. Those things are so much more nourishing for our souls.
Absolutely. It's about prioritizing those activities that bring us joy, purpose, and connection, rather than getting sucked into the endless vortex of the internet.
I love that. So far, this has been such an insightful exploration of discipline. It's not about being superhuman, but it's about understanding our habits, building that willpower muscle, creating an environment that supports our goals. It's about being intentional with our time and energy.
Exactly. And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore in terms of practical strategies for mastering self-discipline. Welcome back to Books and Bytes. We're continuing our deep dive into The Power of Discipline by Daniel Walter. And I'm excited to explore some more of these practical strategies for building that self-control muscle and achieving our goals.
Yeah, in the last part, we talked a lot about setting ourselves up for success, creating an environment that supports our goals. But what happens when we find ourselves in those moments where willpower alone just isn't cutting it?
Right. Like when you know you should be working on that project, but you just can't seem to resist the urge to check social media. Or you hit the snooze button 5 times, even though you told yourself you'd get up early to exercise.
Exactly. We've all been there. So what does the power of discipline have to say about overcoming those mental hurdles?
Well, one really interesting tool that the book introduces is something called the 5-second rule.
Oh, I've heard of that. Isn't that the one where you just count down from 5 and then take action?
That's the one. It was popularized by Mel Robbins. And it's a super simple technique, but it can be surprisingly effective for short-circuiting those moments of hesitation or procrastination.
It sounds almost too easy. Does it really work?
Well, the book actually delves into the neuroscience behind it. It explains that when we hesitate or overthink, we're basically giving our brains a chance to talk us out of doing the thing we know we should do.
Oh, that makes sense. Like our brains are trying to protect us from discomfort or effort.
Right. But by counting down from 5 and then immediately taking action, we're basically interrupting that overthinking process and activating the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain responsible for decision making.
It's like we're outsmarting our own brains.
Exactly. It's a way to kind of hack our own neurobiology to get ourselves moving. Think about those mornings when you hit the snooze button over and over again. Instead of letting yourself get caught in that cycle, try the 5-second rule. Count down from 5, just get out of bed. You might be surprised how much easier it is to get going.
That's a great tip. I'm definitely going to try that. Now, speaking of pushing past our comfort zones, I know the book also talks about something called the 40% rule.
Yes. This is a fascinating concept that comes from Navy SEAL training. And it basically suggests that when we feel like giving up, we've actually only tapped into about 40% of our true capacity.
Wow, really? So we have way more in the tank than we think.
Way more. We have so much more resilience and potential than we often give ourselves credit for.
So it's not just about physical strength. It's about mental toughness, too.
Absolutely. It's about pushing through those mental barriers and discovering what we're truly capable of achieving.
So it's not that we're actually weak or incapable. It's that our minds tend to quit before our bodies do.
Exactly. We often give in to discomfort or fatigue way too early, limiting ourselves in the process.
So the 40% rule is kind of a reminder to challenge those limits, to push ourselves further than we think we can go.
Precisely. And it can apply to anything, from physical challenges like running a marathon to mental challenges like tackling a complex work project.
So the next time I'm feeling tempted to give up on something, I'm going to remember that 40% rule. Now, along with these mental strategies, I know the book also emphasizes the importance of our environment.
Oh, absolutely. Our surroundings play a huge role in shaping our behavior. We've talked about setting up our physical space in a way that makes it easier to make positive choices. But it goes beyond that. It's about creating mental and emotional environments that support our goals as well.
So how do we do that? What are some concrete steps we can take to cultivate those supportive environments?
Well, one powerful tool is mindfulness. Practicing mindfulness can help us become more aware of our thoughts and feelings without judgment.
Right. It's about observing those thoughts and emotions rather than getting swept away by them.
Exactly. And this can be really helpful for identifying those negative thought patterns or limiting beliefs that might be sabotaging our efforts. Because if we're not even aware of those negative self-talk loops running in the background, it's hard to break free from them.
That's so true. We can be our own worst critics sometimes. So mindfulness can help us catch those negative thoughts and reframe them in a more positive light.
Exactly. And this is where the book's discussion of a growth mindset comes in.
Ah, yes. The growth mindset. That's all about believing that our abilities aren't fixed, but rather can be developed through effort and learning.
Right. It's that classic idea of neurons that fire together, wire together. The more we practice a particular skill or habit, the stronger those neural pathways become, making it easier to perform that action in the future.
So it's not about being naturally gifted or talented. It's about putting in the work, embracing the challenges, and knowing that we can always improve.
Exactly. A growth mindset helps us see those challenges and setbacks as opportunities for learning and growth, rather than as evidence of our limitations.
And that can make all the difference in our ability to persevere and achieve our goals. It's about seeing those obstacles as stepping stones rather than roadblocks. Now, this brings us to another really important concept explored in the book: self-accountability.
Yes, self-accountability is crucial for bridging that gap between intention and action. It's about taking ownership of our choices and being willing to answer to ourselves for our behavior.
It's easy to set goals and make grand plans, but without a system for holding ourselves accountable, it's all too easy to let those intentions fade away. We need those check-in points to keep ourselves on track.
Exactly. And the book offers some practical tools for enhancing self-accountability. Things like journaling, finding an accountability partner, and creating reward systems.
I love the idea of journaling. It can be such a powerful way to track our progress, identify patterns in our behavior, and reflect on our successes and challenges. It's like having an ongoing conversation with ourselves, a space to document our journey and gain those valuable insights into our own thought processes and actions.
Absolutely. And for those who find it helpful to have external support, an accountability partner can provide that extra boost of motivation and encouragement.
It's like having a cheerleader in your corner, someone who believes in you and helps you stay committed to your goals. And of course, reward systems can be a great way to make the journey more enjoyable and reinforce positive behavior.
It's not about punishing ourselves for slip-ups, but rather about acknowledging and celebrating our efforts, even the small ones. It's about making the process of building discipline more positive and sustainable. As we wrap up our deep dive into The Power of Discipline by Daniel Walter, I think it's helpful to take a step back and think about some of the key takeaways. What are those big ideas that we can really put into practice in our own lives?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest aha moments for me was realizing that discipline isn't about being some kind of superhuman, like you don't have to have this endless supply of willpower. It's really more like a skill, a muscle that we can build over time.
Exactly. And one of the things I appreciate about this book is that it really breaks down the science behind self-control in a way that's easy to understand, explaining that our willpower operates like a limited but renewable resource. It gets depleted with use, but can be strengthened with practice, just like any other muscle in our body.
Right, and that's so empowering, I think, because it means that anyone can cultivate greater discipline, regardless of their starting point. It's not about being naturally gifted or anything like that.
Absolutely. And it takes the pressure off, you know? We don't have to be perfect right away. We can just focus on those small, consistent efforts day after day and gradually build that self-control muscle over time.
And I think that's a really important point, because sometimes we get so caught up in wanting to make these big, dramatic changes, but really, it's those small, consistent actions that ultimately lead to lasting transformation.
Right. It's like that saying, Rome wasn't built in a day. Big changes happen one brick at a time. And the book actually highlights this concept of the 1% rule.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. What is that again?
Basically, it's the idea that if we can aim to get just 1% better each day, whether it's in our productivity, our health, our relationships, whatever it is we're working on, those small gains will compound over time, leading to really significant progress.
Well, it's so encouraging. It's like those little things we do each day, they might seem insignificant in the moment, but they really do add up over time.
They absolutely do. And I think that's a much more sustainable approach than trying to do everything at once and then burning ourselves out.
It's about those small, incremental steps, those tiny wins, that when you string them all together, create that momentum towards our goals.
Exactly. It's like creating a positive feedback loop. Each small success motivates us to keep going, to keep striving for that next 1% improvement. Now, I know we've talked about this a bit already, but I think it's worth revisiting the importance of understanding that habit loop. That three-part process of cue, routine, and reward.
Right, because once we understand those cues that are triggering our habits, both good and bad, we can start to interrupt those automatic patterns and make more conscious choices.
Precisely. It's like we're taking back control of those autopilot responses.
Yeah.
And we become the architects of our own habits.
And I think the book does a great job of giving us those practical strategies for doing just that. Things like setting up our environment to support our desired habits, using visual cues to remind us of our goals, finding accountability partners to help keep us on track.
Right. All of those tools can be incredibly effective for creating lasting change. And when we combine those strategies with things like the 5-second rule, which helps us overcome procrastination, and the 40% rule, which reminds us that we have so much more potential than we often tap into, well, we're really unstoppable.
We have that whole arsenal of tools at our disposal to help us push through those challenges and achieve those goals.
Exactly. And, I think one of the most important ideas that underpins all of these strategies, and really the whole book, is the power of a growth mindset.
The growth mindset. Yes, that's so important. Because it's all about believing that our abilities aren't fixed, but can be developed through dedication, effort, and learning.
Right. It's about embracing challenges as opportunities to learn and grow, and seeing those setbacks as valuable feedback rather than as evidence of our limitations.
Like instead of saying, I'm not good at this, we say, I'm not good at this yet.
Exactly. It's a subtle shift in perspective, but it can make all the difference in our ability to persevere and achieve our goals.
It's like those obstacles become stepping stones rather than roadblocks. And this ties into another key theme from the book, I think, and that's self-accountability.
Oh, absolutely. Self-accountability is essential for bridging that gap between intention and action. It's about taking ownership of our choices and being willing to answer to ourselves for our behavior.
It's easy to set goals and make those big plans, but without a system for holding ourselves accountable, it's all too easy for those intentions to kind of fade away. We need those check-in points to keep us on track.
Right. And the book offers some really helpful tools for enhancing self-accountability, Things like journaling, finding an accountability partner, creating reward systems.
I love that. It's about finding what works for us as individuals and creating that personalized system for staying aligned with our goals and our values.
Exactly. And it's not about being perfect, It's about progress, not perfection.
Right. It's about those small steps, those consistent efforts that ultimately add up to a more disciplined and fulfilling life.
I couldn't agree more. If you're feeling inspired to learn more, I highly recommend checking out The Power of Discipline by Daniel Walter. We'll be sure to include a link in the show notes. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to Books and Bytes for more deep dives into the world of books and ideas. Thanks for joining us.